Welcome to Stay Sharp in Digital Engineering, your trusted guide to navigating the future of digital innovation in products and manufacturing. In this episode, Jonathan Scott and I have Steve Nichols in to discuss the essential components of digital engineering in government programs. We explore how agencies can start implementing digital engineering practices, the importance of workforce considerations, and the challenges of interoperability. Steve emphasizes the need for a digital-first mindset and the role of governance and policy in shaping digital strategies. Let's dive in. Welcome back, everybody, to Stay Sharp in Digital Engineering, the podcast about all things digital related to products from engineering, manufacturing, services, and more. I'm one of your hosts, Julianne Grant, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Jonathan Scott.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Jonathan. So today we're back here talking about digital engineering and how to get started with it.
I love it.
Yes. So it's a pretty big topic. So this will cover 2 episodes. But today we're talking about how folks on the government side can get started with digital engineering and what they do, what they need to begin. This certainly applies to the U.S. Department of Defense program offices, but also applies to non-DoD entities like NASA, Homeland Security, Treasury, and any other group acquiring equipment or systems for the government. And these concepts certainly apply in other parts of the world, too. Many countries are embracing these concepts, but we all know government contracts, and no matter what country you're in, you're not always the first to move or embrace new technology. So a little bit slow to adopt at times. So we wanted to talk a little bit how government agencies can get started with digital engineering. So to do that, we have invited a special guest with us today, and he's been on before. He's one of our favorites, Steve Nichols. Welcome back to the podcast, Steve.
Hey, folks. Thank you for having me.
We're happy to have you. So for those of you who don't know Steve, and we've introduced him before, but I haven't had a proper bio. So today we have a proper bio. So let's talk a little bit about Steve. So Steve heads up our public sector and defense group here at Razorleaf and has spent his career leading technology-based groups and organizations over a wide variety of positions. So including technology support, operations, marketing, project and product management, innovation strategy, and other leadership responsibilities. So he's been on many sides of the organization. But he's also been part of many successful organizations, including LCI, Silicon Graphics, Technographics, CACI, MRI Software, and he helped form the Razorleaf Government Solutions business about 10 years ago with our CEO, Eric Dept. So he's covered a spectrum of things from supporting small to large organizations on both commercial and federal markets. So we're happy to have you, Steve. What a nice background.
Thank you.
We are. And it's fun to hear all those details, Steve. We've had this many conversations and haven't talked through all that. So that's good stuff.
That's right.
Okay, but with that, I want to jump right into what you were saying a minute ago, Julianne, and kind of set the stage for a few questions on this topic of looking at, getting started with DE from the government perspective. I think many of our DoD listeners are well aware of the backdrop of this conversation, but I know not everybody is. So I'll fill everybody else in a bit. And you mentioned this is applicable to people outside of DoD, but this DoD stuff I'm going to talk about kind of lays that landscape. So back in 2020, the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering issued an instruction, right? That's DoD instruction 5000.88. And that basically said, now it said a lot of things in it, right? But it basically said to all DoD entities, you have to conduct a comprehensive engineering program when you buy defense systems, right? And that program has to include a systems engineering plan or SEP. That's probably feels like common sense to a lot of people. And I know that DoD was doing engineering long before 2020 in that instruction. But that sort of formally said some things. And it went further to say, if you're buying something major, right? And that's, ACAT and different categories. I won't go into all that jargon. But if it's something major, it has to have in the systems engineering plan a digital engineering implementation plan. Okay, so now the term's out there, right? Certainly the term's out there before, but now it's sort of codified as like the government's saying this is something you need to do. So in late 2023, we get sort of an expansion on that further. The same office issued instruction 5000.97. Now, this is something a lot of people have been talking about in the last year or two because it is fairly new. Now, that essentially said DoD entities need to address digital engineering in the acquisition strategy and how it's going to be used throughout the life of whatever is being bought. In other words, use digital engineering, right? That's kind of what that instruction said. Where before it's like, well, you need to have a plan, it needs to be part of your plan, and your plan could be whatever it's going to be. Now it's like, no, use it. Of course, other parts of the government have been pioneers in various aspects of DE also, right? So I don't want to just focus on DoD and sort of ignore that, right? I mean, let's not forget how much of a role NASA has contributed in this area, right? Like I think the term digital twin actually came from someone at NASA years ago. And certainly lots of countries outside of the US are also on this bandwagon of digital engineering. For example, NATO is big on digital engineering. So anyway, with that backdrop, kind of giving people that level set for people who aren't aware of it, let's dig in a little bit. So Steve, I know you're well aware of those things, but for our listeners, let's talk about what the key components are of digital engineering that government program offices should be thinking about. Those instructions kind of tell us, hey, use DE. What are those components? What are the pieces that make up DE?
Yeah, so thanks, Jonathan. When we think about digital engineering, you think about CAD, you think about some of those other types of tool sets that people would see when you're looking at something in the movies, or you think about, okay, hey, let's design this on a computer, and kind of how that's going to look, right? But there's some foundational components that you really should be thinking about if you're thinking of as a program starting to incorporate digital engineering, and kind of where that gets going and kind of concepts to keep in mind. And so I would say there's probably 6 things to keep in mind as you start up a digital engineering kind of set of tasks and a program and kind of that future vision.
So not purely like, just get your own Jarvis from Iron Man, but more practical.
If you could, right?
Okay, all right, fair enough.
Right? I mean, I'm all for that actually. But on the chances that one of those isn't available today, like you can't get it on Amazon Prime or where you all get all the good stuff from, you're going to want to think about a couple foundational components. And so this is really in no particular order, but really thinking about the tools, the data interoperability, and the tools that you're going to use to both use this to operate this program and work with your suppliers. So that'd be data interoperability and integrated tool chains. And how do those things start to tie together? And there's a bunch of standards that you would think about and planning for kind of onboarding and other things. But really thinking about how does this data flow and work together between the government and its supply chain. So that's the first one. You're going to then think about, okay, you've got this data that's going to flow and the tools that are out there and that we're all using similar or the same tools. So then where's your environment? How do you have a collaboration environment and kind of a digital ecosystem, right? So if my engineers at the government are doing some work or reviewing some information, how do we capture that review and one of our suppliers actually in the same types of systems act against that review? So you can really speed the review cycle process here. You can speed feedback. You can speed updates by utilizing really common tools that are used across industry today. So the risk here is really low. It's setting up and adopting those types of environments that are really important for what you're thinking about doing.
So I think I hear you saying there, Steve, and just want to make sure I'm, sort of interpreting it right. Yep. Environment or environments, right? Could be multiple. Maybe you've got one, maybe the customer has one, but you should think about that as you're setting up your DE. Will you have all these environments? How many will there be? What will be in them? That kind of thing. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's really it. And and what drives that and kind of helps you decide the environments are really what you decide is your authoritative source of truth. So where is the truth when you want, or your engineers want, your program managers want, your suppliers want, when you want to know an answer to a question, where does that come from? And so where is that data housed and how is it protected? How is it updated? Thinking about the life cycle of that information, how is it managed? It's that where is your authoritative source of truth? And then what's the environment in which it lives?
Right. And we've talked about that in other episodes, right? So people could go back and listen to something, I don't remember how long ago this was, but we talked about IDEs, right? Integrated digital environments. And that's the kind of thing here, right? Is what environments you're going to have, what's going to go in them. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And the reason you might have a couple different authoritative sources of truth, I wouldn't say that it's a different authority, we'll call that an ASOT. I wouldn't say it's a different ASOT per se, but you might have multiple layers of classification. And so one layer of classification might support a second layer, which might support a third, where you would have data flowing in one direction, but not back. And so that's where you really kind of think about it. A program at the secret level may be the hold all of all the information. So from CUI moves to secret, And then the top secret, they have kind of fill-in boxes for what they want to work on, but they may not be seeing information from the secret level. They just do their work there as well. And so really kind of thinking about what that data flow is going to be and what makes sense for the majority of the operation of the program. Running everything at the highest classification or the highest security may not make sense for being efficient in operation and sustainment of these programs long term. So I would say, a couple afternoons at a whiteboard, thinking about what really makes sense can set you up for decades of success by thinking about that up front.
Okay. What else?
I was just going to, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think that it sounds simple, but it must be one of the hardest things to do. Or is it really just an afternoon on a whiteboard? You're talking about interoperability, you're talking about supply chain, you're talking about other feeder systems. I mean, it feels complex.
It actually is complex. And at that couple of afternoons at a whiteboard is really going to think about what the whole ecosystem is going to be. And you're going to need to simplify it down to start to think about some actions that ecosystem is going to need to support and some use cases that ecosystem is going to need to support, and not get lost in all the fine details. If you can map out the basics and a structure, you can then start to build in the details out on the edges of this structure. And actually, the next point that I was going to bring up after you're defining your ASOT is really think about how that you're going to start building a digital thread, how that digital thread will be maintained. And so thinking about the on-roads and off-roads and kind of what that loop looks like for that digital thread, which is or maintains your authoritative source of truth, which works inside your collaborative environment, which then lives with tools and data interoperability between systems, right? So we're kind of stacking these as you go, but it's really defining that, getting down to creating and maintaining a digital thread. And one of the things that I would say is when you're thinking about these kind of components, don't get overwhelmed with trying to boil the ocean all at once. You're never going to get started then. You're going to get overwhelmed. Pick a couple use cases, pick a system or two, and start somewhere, and then with success, start adding to it. And over time, this will build, and you'll be there. You can start with a digital engineering mindset and approach, but you gotta, when the rubber meets the road in an old school type of environment, you actually have to just start somewhere and then build on it.
Yeah, you gotta do something.
Yeah, do something, right? I mean, and then the last point that I would think about is think about your workforce. So today, the folks that you have are the folks that you have, and they're either going to come with ideas and come with capabilities, or you're going to need to train them. So you're going to need to think about workforce adoption, workforce change, culture change, and also for these military programs, the folks that are going to maintain those programs are really in the future are really young today. They're not part of your workforce, but they're going to be, and they're used to living on their mobile devices, and they're used to interacting in ways that the program needs to adopt and support as it moves into the future as well, so that the program as it moves meets the skills coming in off the street. And that's really important, because otherwise you're going to have a greater and greater gap that you're going to try and fill. And you're not going to take advantage of not only the tool sets, but the people coming in. You're not going to play to everybody's strengths. And so that culture change is really important in addition to the technology.
And that's a tricky one that's kind of new. I mean, when you think about it, right? I mean, through all the things that have happened in defense programs over the last 100 years or whatever, it was just a lot of paper. Now the paper changed, and there probably were some digital systems backing it up. But when you got right down to it, maintainers out on the flight line were still working from paper, and that today is changing, and that's a big change to be ready for it. So it's interesting that you note that as one of the components when you think about digital engineering. Think all the way out there, all the way out to that 18-year-old kid who's like, yeah, how do I do this? I don't want to do it with a piece of paper.
Well, and so it's adopting a digital first mindset. And that's really what you have to do. Paper should be an exception, and we should really have to debate why we need something along those lines. Why do we have to print something out? Why do we have to go to a static copy of something? There may be a use case that supports it, but it should be a rare exception as opposed to part of the overall process. That should be something that you fight against.
Yeah, as I'm listening to this, it makes me really understand why having someone from the outside to help drive some of these conversations becomes really important because it is, when you think about government organizations, there's a lot of people who've been there for years and years and years. People want to kind of do things and have domain expertise over certain areas, but not over other areas. So it's got to be someone who can help, piece all this together and drive a conversation, because I can imagine there's a lot of smart people in a room. A lot of people have some opinions about what needs to happen where.
Well, and that's what you're exactly right. And that's one of the reasons that I come back to. People are going to want to boil the ocean. Everybody's going to want to bring an opinion in, and their opinions and will have similar weightings, because you're not really an expert in digital engineering per se, or one component of digital engineering, but not the broad base. And so there'll be terms and approaches and all kinds of stuff thrown around, at which point, where do you start? When everybody has an opinion and it's all weighted the same, there's no priority. Everything's a priority.
Right.
And so you start to back up and say, okay, where do we start for something like this? Knowing where we're going to get, what the vision is, right? When you're walking to the horizon, you still have to take a step to start.
Right.
And so it's determining a couple of those steps and be simple about them and show some success up front.
Right. Well, that kind of leads us to the next question: is, do you have to be at the beginning of a acquisition cycle to use digital engineering, and why or why not?
No, you really don't. The tools are out there, right? And so if you're not at the beginning of an acquisition cycle, and a lot of programs aren't. A lot of programs have been around for quite a while, but the tools are there in ways that you can start to adopt them, and even basic stuff, right? Start with two things. Start with digitizing some of the stuff that you have, some of the data that you have. You have data already, but it's probably not connected or utilized with or in conjunction with any other data. And you can start to digitize some of the artifacts that are floating around as paper today, and then turn them into basic lifecycle management. There are tools out there. Most of the commands have basic lifecycle management tools that you can use, and if not, they're all COTS tools. You can pick them up. Look at basic change control, basic workflow automation, just a couple of those types of things. You've probably got access to tools that do that. Start to utilize them. Quit emailing things out to somebody and then expecting a return.
Mm-hmm.
Quit dumping stuff in SharePoint and expecting a return. There's a lot of those types of things that we use the tools that we have today. And let me rephrase that. We use the capabilities that we are aware of and comfortable with today. And we should be thinking about ways to adopt some of the capabilities that we have access to but haven't really used. But don't get overwhelmed by them. Start to use them simplistically for basic things and then build on that success.
Well, and I think you keep bringing up a point, Steve, that seems very relevant to me, because it can be confusing and it can be a lot. And the point I'm hearing you raise is know where you want to go. Take a first step towards the horizon, but know that where on the horizon is you're trying to get to. If you've got that viewpoint of where you want to be with those components of digital engineering you mentioned, it's easier to take a small step, right? Because you mentioned SharePoint. It made me think, actually, SharePoint might not be a bad answer, right? If you were in paper, but you could digitize, and now you could use SharePoint to automate some processes, that could be an easy stepping stone if something like PLM looks too hard, right? Or you're not quite ready for it, or not everybody that you have to work with is quite ready for it. But it doesn't change the fact that you need to know where you want to be to be able to take those steps, to know you're stepping in the right direction.
That's exactly right. And one of the things that I would think about in this 3 or 4 day whiteboarding session or afternoon whiteboarding session that I referenced earlier is really spending a little bit of time and thinking about the strategy you want to adopt. You can articulate the vision of the future, but think about the strategy it's going to take to get there. And one of the aspects of a good strategy is it allows you to say no to a suggestion when it pops up, because it doesn't fit the approach or doesn't fit the strategy, at which point you can start to prioritize actions and prioritize tasks and do some of those things and deprioritize something else, parking lot it, revisit it later. If you can map that out early on, and it allows you to say no to something when it pops up because that's a different priority than what you need to do to get something done, that's really important. Being able to say no to something it helps keep you on track and allows you to make progress versus litigating each idea when it pops up.
That makes me think of another, I guess, maybe it's like a myth of getting started in this space, at least that I've heard from a number of government customers we've talked to, is the assumption is, well, if I need to do digital engineering, what I need is CAD and PDM and PLM and ALM, and I need all these systems. I need to go get them. That's sort of counter to what you're saying, right? Like, know where you want to go and why you want to get there before you start just jumping into all this stuff. So I want to tie that back to the question Julianne just asked about, do you need to be at the start of an acquisition program for this to make sense? And you said, no, you don't. Well, let me break it down even smaller than that. Do you need to use all these tools? I mean, I think you've already answered that, but let me just ask it explicitly. Can you get value, real digital engineering value, out of just doing kind of point solutions, things that are solving specific problems?
Yeah, most definitely. Right. Think about the problems that you have today and what capabilities we have in a digital realm to potentially support those. And if they match, then figure out how to get them in. And so, I talked about digitizing some of your basic artifacts already, right? And thinking about lifecycle management, change control, workflows, right? So think about your existing requirements, some interfaces, those types of things, system diagrams. Go through, start converting those things to SysML. Start with some basics, because even as you think about digital engineering, or what we'll say model-based engineering, kind of that next step of thinking about kind of what's a source of truth, even basic models of your processes can start to add value and start to help communicate in ways that you are going to struggle to do today, right? And so you start to get a baseline that others can contribute to and others can comment against, and allows you to start to take a digital first mindset, or at least start to grow a digital first mindset. It's when you start to think about all the tools in aggregate and all the different components and all the different capabilities that you start to get overwhelmed and you're not sure where to start, right? Well, we have CAD data coming in, but we don't necessarily have the licenses to look at it all. We have a place to store it in SharePoint because PLM is pretty complex. Our process means that I need to email for a request and a form, a PDF to come back in order to make those updates. All those things, all those actions, tasks, requirements can start to be supported inside of this digital environment. But if you tackle them all at once, you're going to be overwhelmed. And so you'll get value out of it. But take a bite of an apple, work on it, take another bite of an apple, adopt that, take a third bite of the apple. Eventually that apple is going to be gone and you'll have some of these in place without not only burning you up, but burning your workforce up.
So I get that. I think that makes good sense to, don't bite off more than you can chew with your analogy, right? And think about the steps that you take. Let me back it up. We talked about a couple of afternoons of whiteboarding, like Julianne was asking, like, this sounds kind of complex. Let's just back it up to, say you are at the beginning of a program like this, right? Speaking to that person in our audience today, you're greenfield. What do you do to get started? Do you start with the whiteboard session? Do you start with the capabilities analysis? Like, where do you begin to get on this step-by-step path?
So if you're starting an acquisition cycle and thinking about what this is going to look like over the next 20, 30 years, you've got a lot of models of success that you can look at to begin with, but most of them don't have a digital first mindset. So you're going to need to have I would say, look at the models from the past, so you get an idea of kind of what that structure for multiple decade programs going to look like, and then find a digital advocate or three, not just one, not just two, but you want to get a couple in and start to bring them into the conversation and ask them, how is this going to change? What capabilities should we be weaving in? And you're going to start dropping out whole sections of tasks and types of support and interfaces that you would have had in that old program and replace them with that digital first mentality. And so thinking about it with a digital advocate or a couple, and that might be in the government, that might be a partner, that might be a couple contractors. Bring those voices into the conversation. You're not looking for the depth that you would need getting down to the tool level. You're really looking for the capability and the approach in its application, and thinking about longevity. What do we need today to support change 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Because tools are going to be different. Approaches are going to be different. Security is going to be different. So how do you think about a plug and play process over time that allows you to take advantage of modern capabilities as they evolve.
So what I hear you saying is, trying to think of the right way to sort of encapsulate what I'm hearing, because it makes perfect sense to me, right? Think through it, but it's business transformation, right? Take a minute if you're at the start and envision where you want to be. Don't go solving it, right?
Right.
But think about, what does it take to get there? What are the places you need to be on the pathway? And then that gives you a framework or an architecture to build against? I mean, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it really does. And you can lay out an architecture for success that involves change or includes change in the future. It's just you're accounting for that particular process at some point. And maybe it's something as simple as, every 5 years, we're going to do a technology, this particular program is going to do a technology analysis and potential refresh. And we built that into the conversation. Right. And so if an OEM knows that coming in, that this is something that the government is going to keep in mind and going to require, and it's part of this program, then we build for those conversations as we go. And maybe it's not every 5 years, but there's some process there that is that, hey, let's have an offsite and think about what has changed, what could we be doing different, what is that constant organizational update, program update that we really need to keep in mind so that we maintain a digital first mindset going forward and that collaborative environment.
That makes a lot of sense to me. However, one of the things you mentioned very early in this conversation was, in this setting up the strategy, was this term of interoperability, and then, having integrated systems. Is this what you're talking? To me, it feels a little bit different than this. I mean, the digital first mindset makes a lot of sense because you do need to think in those realms, but how ready is this part of, this type of business or this organization ready for, interoperability? Are there standards really there? I mean, I know they're a little thin on the commercial side. So, where are we at with that, and how easy or not easy is that?
You know what? To be blunt, it's not easy. There are ecosystems of tools out there that talk about interoperability between capabilities. But when you start thinking about, bringing in different tools and, maybe a couple of different CAD packages, depending on what you have, and then one of those CAD packages has an electrical package you want to use, but you want to use the hydraulics of a different CAD package, or you want to use change management and finite element analysis, not to get over geeky there, but kind of thinking about some of those really high-end mathematical packages, but also then workflow analysis. And workflow tools and automated workflows, and then thinking about business intelligence. And then you throw AI into the mix. Like, where does AI go, right? It goes everywhere, and yet it doesn't kind of live in any one spot, but yet still has that impact, right? And so really, Julianne, really to come back to it, the concept of data and system interoperability is there, and I think it's getting better, but it still has a ways to go. And keep in mind, software vendors or capability vendors don't always have an incentive to make their system easy.
That's true.
Easy to get data in and out of, right? Once they start doing that, then they become a little more replaceable, because the data that they had is no longer secure in their system. It's moving back and forth. So then they have to think about the value that they add to the overall program and what does it take to either maintain their presence there or get replaced. So there are ways to go. Now, I will say one of the nice things is that a lot of the tools or capabilities that we use rely on databases. And so on a lot of the tools that historically we were using that didn't use databases, but maybe used a file-based structure, are also moving to databases. So as you start to have a database-based environment, it's an overly long use of the word base there, but as you start to have that type of environment and those types of tools, you have the ability to go in and pull and look at data using different methods, and then you can start to connect some of those data pools back and forth. But it's not impossible. It's just not as easy as it probably will be in the future.
And that's one kind of data interoperability. And your question, Julianne, makes perfect sense. I think it's a big challenge. There's another one, Steve, if you could comment on this too. I remember seeing this in working with some of our actually Navy customers, the interoperability across sort of areas of responsibility inside of an organization at large, right? So you could be at a program office having this whole digital engineering plan for how you're going to do things within that program, but then, that platform needs to get maintained by a fleet readiness center, which is their own domain of responsibility. And is your data interoperable with them? Maybe they're still focused on paper because of the other programs they have to support. And that whole thing of, different levels of maturity within the organization, that kind of interoperability, it's also a thing to consider when you're getting started.
It is. Well, so that's life cycle interoperability. Right. So we're going to go through, and if we're starting a program, we're going to throw requirements out today. Companies are going to bid on it. We're going to select one of them, and we're going to start moving forward with the design supporting those requirements. But I would say at that point, as that design is coming on board, we really also want to have sustainability in mind. We may not be populating sustainability systems for another decade, but we want to make sure that what we're doing today can support a sustainability set of requirements or responsibilities in the future, that we're not just handing information over or throwing it over the wall, that sustainability has some point in the conversation, even if it's really small today, so that as the platform evolves and grows and is acquired, that sustainability kind of starts to roll into the conversation more and more as it starts to pick up and the platform starts to move into sustainability. So I'd say it's almost kind of a spectrum, a dial that you're having here, but sustainability should still be in consideration early on.
Yeah, that sounds a little bit like we're going to start touching into our next episode discussion. And I want to watch the time. So I think this has been really interesting, but I think, Jonathan, I bet you have summary points for us.
So, yeah, the things that I heard in terms of, what should people be thinking about? The first point you made, Steve, was there's 6 components. Now, I think I only caught 5 of them, but things that they need to think about related to digital engineering. First is tools and data, right? Think about the tools and data that you're going to need to deal with and the interoperability of all that. Think about the environments that's going to live in, right? Tools might live together, might need to exchange data. You might have multiple environments for yourself, for partners, people you work with, levels of classification, but think about how the different things need to be sort of segregated or grouped. Understand what's going to be authoritative. ASOTs, you mentioned, authoritative sources of truth. What's really authoritative? What's a copy? What's shared? That kind of thing is important, and that really matters in the digital world. And then planning for your digital thread. That's sort of a logical extension of that piece. As you think about how all that data is weaved together, you need to know what's authoritative, that's how you're weaving it together, that you're not working with old or outdated copies or that kind of thing. And how are you going to not just build it, but maintain it over time, which comes back to some of the other elements you talked about. And then the last one that I heard was think about your workforce, right? And that's maybe a surprise to people. We're talking about digital, but we're bringing up people, but that's clearly connected, right? You can't do any of this or use any of these DE components without people making use of them, at least not yet, right? We're not to the AI thing fully. So those are the couple of things I heard there that you need to be thinking about. And then the other things from our conversation are, those are valuable even if you are in the middle of a program. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to do all those pieces that we just talked about as key components, but you can get value out of DE and even just out of specific tools or point solutions. So, look at the needs you have and consider how some digital engineering aspect might help you out, but don't ignore it just because you're sort of midlife. And then the last thing we came back to is, but if you are starting greenfield, where should you begin? Where should you get started? And the key message I heard out of all of that, because we talked about, frameworks and thinking ahead and roadmaps and all that throughout the conversation. But with that, do think about where you want to be. Get ready to take steps along the way to get there. But when you're thinking about that big picture and all of those components, don't get overwhelmed, right? Don't get stuck on how am I going to get there? I don't even know how I'll get to that point. Recognize that this is going to change over time, but start with a vision of how do I want to operate? Get a vision in mind for, all right, if I'm going to be digital first, what does that mean to me now, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now? And then have that framework to work toward it, knowing that you don't have to have all areas figured out. Some of them you might not figure out for 5 or 10 years, but have that vision and get a framework so you can chip away at it and take the bites out of the apple. That's what I took out of what we talked about, but what did I miss, Steve?
I don't think you missed anything, actually. The one component that I didn't mention is governance and policy.
Okay.
Right? So that would be the sixth of the six that I referenced. And just kind of thinking about how you include the governance and policy inside your program, the governing agencies, the DoD, other standards agencies, NIST, and then other relevant agencies are going to really be thinking about the digital realm, not only how you use it, but how you protect it. And so kind of keeping those in mind too, and having somebody that is up to date on those types of foresight, vision, guidance, or whatever you want to call it, is just important there, right? And so, because that's really going to build the box in which that's going to help frame the box in which you're hoping to operate in amongst all the other components that you have there.
Right. Not just the standards that can help out with interoperability, but the guidance too. Like you said, you mentioned security and a bunch of things that help shape that box you're trying to live in.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I learned quite a bit in this as well. I mean, there were a lot of areas, this whole digital first thinking, which I think is really smart. And the one thing that the light bulb went off of me is when you mentioned the workforce piece, Jonathan, and as in your summary is that, we got to remember you got to design for the workforce that's not even there yet. And, when you think about the longevity and the types of products that the government organizations develop, they have long, long years of life. So that's super important because, yeah, I mean, I know that some younger kids are much better on the phone than I am, and that's pretty sad, So we got the digital natives to think about. But this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much, Steve.
Yeah, it's been good stuff, man.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome.
Yeah, and I think, we're our next episode that we're going to kind of dive a little bit deeper on this is, supporting a government program with digital engineering. So I think that, some of these things might come back up again, but in a slightly different context. So we look forward to that conversation as well. All right. Well, with that, everybody, I thank you, Steve, for your time today. And thanks, Jonathan, as always. It's always fun.
Always a good time.
And if anyone has any questions for Steve about starting a digital engineering program, please make sure to hit us up in a comment. We'd love to hear from you and have this conversation in more detail. And with that, everybody, we hope you have a great day and stay sharp. Thanks for being here and listening to this episode of Stay Sharp with Razorleaf. If you like this podcast, please be sure to hit that like button. We'd really appreciate it. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform or watch us on YouTube. If you have any questions, please leave us a comment on our post or send us an email to podcast@razorleaf.com. Till next time, everybody, stay sharp.